Doctor Who would turn 10 in November 1973, and like a lot of milestones, people want to celebrate them a year early. In January 1973, 9 years and 1 month after the series debuted, Doctor Who's 10th season got off to a flying start with a concept that had been suggested by many but thought to be a little too obvious by the production team: a story with all of the Doctors in it. Looking for a gimmick to launch the new season, producer Barry Letts and script editor Terence Dix finally looked at each other and said, "Why the hell are we not doing this?" It's one of those things that makes perfect sense in hindsight, like putting a camera into a telephone, or adding maple syrup to pancakes, or pretending your lawnmower's broken when your neighbour wants to borrow it. The Three Doctors by Bob Baker and Dave Martin would see the first, second and third Doctors team up to save the universe from Omega, the long-lost Time Lord pioneer originally responsible for the energy source used by the Time Lords, but now trapped in the universe of antimatter. Unable to help themselves, the Time Lords managed to pluck out the second Doctor from his time stream to help out his immediate successor.
I can see you've been doing the TARDIS up a bit. I don't like it.
While attempts to also involve the first Doctor are only partially successful, resulting in the original Doctor only able to appear on Skype, offering thoughts and prayers to his later selves, so about as useful as a tweet. Two Doctors and a gaggle of companions are transported to Omega's domain, inside the black hole, where it's soon apparent that Omega is as mad as a hat. William Hartnell by this time had become very ill, and as such his role was greatly reduced in order to accommodate what he could manage, basically some filmed inserts that appear on the TARDIS scanner. That just leaves some wonderful repartee between Patrick Troughton and Jon Pertwee, the former a serious character actor who played the role as a clown, and the incumbent, a comedy actor playing a serious role for the first time, who would usually learn his lines word perfect, but now struggled with his predecessor's improvisation.
Oh, so you're my replacements. A dandy and a clown.
They managed to find a way to work together, and the result is magic, which is why fans love multi-Doctor stories so much.
By combining our wills against yours.
Together we were able to break down your barriers, so you're not all powerful after all, Omega.
A disappointing aspect of the story are some of the production values, particularly Omega's gel guards, possibly the least well-realised creatures of the entire Pertwee era, and some rather unimpressive sets in Omega's domain that seem oddly low effort for Doctor Who of the period. Other than that, the story is a lot of fun from start to finish, with a grandiose, almost operatic performance from Stephen Thorne as Omega. It's also the first time that, Joe Grant aside, anyone else from UNIT had actually entered the TARDIS, with both Benton and the Brigadier getting to try out their "what the hell is this" acting. Benton really comes into his own in this story, as the Brigadier initially struggles to come to terms with being transported halfway across the universe, mistaking Omega's world of antimatter for a beach in Norfolk. Having been there, I can certainly understand mistaking a bleak, featureless landscape for Great Yarmouth. At the end of the story, the Doctor is rewarded by the Time Lords with a pardon and a new dematerialization circuit for the TARDIS, which wouldn't alter the story mix too much, but it did signal that UNIT's days were numbered. Now that the TARDIS was under the Doctor's control, the first thing it does is go bung. Carnival of Monsters sees the TARDIS accidentally landing on what appears to be a cargo ship, heading for India in the 1920s, on the same day it famously disappeared off the face of the Earth. When the ship is first attacked by a plesiosaur, then the crew and passengers appear to be stuck in a loop, and then finally a giant hand appears to pinch the TARDIS. Then, and only then, does it become apparent that something might actually be possibly amiss.
Topping day, what?
Absolutely splendid.
Yes, 99 skidoo. Well, must press on.
Written by the classic series' most prolific, reliable and imaginative writer, Robert Holmes, and directed by the series' showrunner, producer Barry Letts, Carnival intersperses the mystery of the ship with two travelling entertainers trying to negotiate a visa with local bureaucrats on the planet Inter Minor. Vorg and Schörner are down on their luck entertainers, who have a device called a miniscope, used to display stylized images of far-off planets for the amusement of ignorant gawkers, just like the departure terminal of Stansted Airport. And wouldn't you know it, the TARDIS has landed inside the miniscope, which is actually an outlawed portable zoo, as well as an ATM. A few rough edges in the production combined with some killer puppet drashigs, Carnival of Monsters offers some pompous alien politics combined with Vorg and Schörner's Gaudi vaudeville act, all of which gives Pertwee's Doctor another chance to walk into a situation and project authority where he should have none.
Just as I thought. A miniscope. Now this is outrageous. Who is responsible for this device? Is it yours?
Certainly not.
A fun romp that holds up well in some areas and less well in others.
Not impossible, Joe. Nothing's impossible. There's always an answer if you can find it.
Yes, such as?
Well, that's the trouble. Finding it.
Frontier in Space kicks off the first half of a 12-episode storyline of galactic war and an invasion 500 years in the future. In order to avoid a collision, the TARDIS materializes on board a space freighter to find a crew on edge. Earth vessels are being attacked by their galactic rivals, the Draconians. Ooh, scary. The freighter is attacked by another vessel, and whereas the Earth crewmen see Draconians, Joe sees a Drashig, while the Doctor seems unaffected by whatever device is used to cause the hallucinations, and just sees Ogrons. It soon becomes apparent that someone is trying to foment an all-out war between Earth and Draconia, and that someone is the Master. The trouble is, nobody believes the Doctor or Joe. I don't blame them. A middle-aged man with no money and Joe Grant hanging off his arm? Yeah, I believe that.
Nobody could be more devoted to the cause of peace than I. Oh, by the way, I need hardly warn you there is no point in trying to escape. This is an interplanetary police spaceship, specially built for carrying prisoners, as you can see.
Frontier in Space is one of those rare space operas attempted by the show in the early 70s, and is a lot of fun, but is possibly the best story to explain to viewers of the modern show why psychic paper was such an important change to the show.
The paper's slightly psychic, shows them whatever I want them to see. Saves a lot of time.
Without psychic paper, it became common, particularly in longer stories, to have the Doctor and companions captured and escaping multiple times in the same story. 6-part story Frontier in Space has the Doctor and Joe being captured first by the crew of the Earth freighter, then again by Earth soldiers, then again by the Draconian embassy staff, then again by the Ogrons, then once again by the Earth authorities, then again by the Master, then again by the Draconians, and then again by the Earth authorities, and finally one last time by the Master. It's a bit of a mixed bag in terms of plot, but it's still fun to watch. It's also the final story to feature Roger Delgado's definitive interpretation of the Doctor's arch-nemesis, as the actor was tragically killed in a car crash shortly after production wrapped on this story.
I've brought some old friends along to meet you.
The second half of the 12-part story arc culminates in the 6-episode story Planet of the Daleks. An injured Doctor sends a message to the Time Lords asking them to send the TARDIS after the Daleks, but he soon lapses into a coma after partying too hard with the cast of the Oneida Line, just as the TARDIS lands on the jungle planet Spyridon. Having recovered, the Doctor is rescued by some Thals who are on Spyridon for their own reasons. The Daleks apparently have an enormous army hidden underneath the planet with stifling heat during the day, freezing at night, with a molten ice core, invisible locals, and killer planes. And you can just tell that Terry Nation wrote this, can't you? Planet of the Daleks is Nation's first script for the show since the mid-60s, and in many ways feels like a compilation of his previous stories, with many recycled story elements. Invisible locals, somebody getting into a Dalek casing, some tenuous science to effect an escape, the oddity of having the Doctor and Joe being surprised to discover the Daleks are involved. Despite the fact the show is called Planet of the Daleks, the Doctor specifically went after the Daleks, and the only people he meets on Spyridon are Thals, the oldest and bitterest enemies of the Daleks. But hey, spray painting an invisible Dalek is kind of a cool way to end an episode.
What did you say to the Time Lords in your message?
Well, I told him about the Dalek spaceship leaving the Ogron planet and told them to send the TARDIS after it.
It's director David Maloney's first story for the show in a few years, and the only one with Pertwee. And while he usually turns in some really excellent stories, this is one of his weaker efforts. Large parts of the story are set in a brightly lit jungle set or in a brightly lit Dalek base with tacky sets. The film sequences, both on location and in Ealing, have much moodier and atmospheric lighting that in no way matches the floodlit studio footage. The Dalek props themselves seem in rather poor shape, with wobbly heads and patchy scuffed paintwork, and generally seem beaten up. The coup de grace is the Supreme Dalek, which is a reworked prop from the 1960s Dalek film starring Peter Cushing. While the extra size gives it additional screen presence, that jam jar stuck on its dome and a flashlight blaring away randomly, completely out of sync with the dialogue, looks really, really awful. At least the Dalek voices are a definite improvement over the previous story.
Exterminate my baby. Exterminate my baby. Primitive spacecraft of type originating on Skaro.
Planet of the Daleks tries to play with the scale of the Dalek army.
Well, somewhere on this planet there are 10,000 Daleks.
10,000 being a terrifying number of Daleks. And while the VFX people did use a bunch of toys that weren't particularly accurate in model shots, the BBC did at least learn from the mistakes of Day of the Daleks and made some full-size dummy Dalek props to swell out their numbers. These non-articulating dummies can be seen in the backgrounds of the next few Dalek stories. Sure beats the cardboard standees used in the 1960s. It's all fun and silly, but fun and yet silly, but fun and still silly. So on the scale of cheesiness, let's rate each episode. Episode 1 is Taleggio, a thin crust with a strong aroma. Episode 2 is Limburger, a strong smell caused by bacteria. Episode 3 is Roquefort, creamy and crumbly. Episode 4 is where the action-adventure tropes really take over. It's Pont l'Evêque, at its best with a strong wine. Episode 5 is Camembert, full of aromatic notes. Episode 6 features the Supreme Dalek, and for that alone, it's Munster d'Alsace. The season ends with the bona fide classic, The Green Death, which is forever known as if it was an episode of Friends as the one with the giant maggots. The Green Death is co-written by series producer Barry Letts along with Robert Sloman and is a very prescient environmental warning masquerading as a story about toxic waste from energy production producing giant maggots. The Doctor and Joe go to Wales so we can enjoy both the very best stereotypes of 1970s Wales and the very best stereotype of the then middle-class vogue of self-sufficiency. The only thing missing is Tom and Barbara Good playing amateur rugby, but if they did, one would hope they would have the good taste to go Skins. After nearly a season of trying to get there, the Doctor finally makes it to Metebelis 3, to find an enormous blue crystal that will conveniently be a story point in this and other stories to come. Global Chemicals announces it has received government approval for its new process to create cheap energy, while at the same time a caretaker has been found dead in a nearby disused mine, glowing bright green, which was unusual because he wasn't even at a rave. Investigating the mine, the Doctor and Joe come across possibly the most disgusting foe in the series' 50-plus year history, the giant maggots. Meanwhile, it's apparent that Global Chemicals is no ordinary company, with a rather extraordinary boss, a computerized intelligence that has designs on taking over the world. By the story's end, Joe Grant has fallen in love with hippie Nobel Prize winner Professor Jones and agreed to run off to the Amazon to look for shrooms. The season ends with the saddened Doctor driving off into the sunset, complete with upside-down title sequence, which means whoever was putting together the end credits that week had already been at the shrooms. Barry Letts was an early champion of environmentalism in the series, and his stories work best when his personal beliefs inform the stories. Here, the series once again warns of what will happen if industrial pollution is allowed to continue unchecked. A theme that also formed the basis of the BBC's contemporary series, Doomwatch. For those who've never seen it, Doomwatch is like a Debbie Downer version of Doctor Who. Michael Bryant's direction is mostly good, though we are treated to a few too many unfortunate uses of chroma key that detract greatly from the otherwise cracking story and assured direction. I'm not so sure about the unit chopper dropping bombs stored in a cardboard box conveyed the professionalism you'd like from a military organisation. The Green Death, being Katy Manning's final story as Joe Grant, isn't all stomach-turning monsters, but also features the blossoming romance between Joe and the Professor Jones, as well as the Doctor coming to the realisation that Joe doesn't need him anymore.
So, the fledgling flies the coop.
It's probably the most emotional farewell of any companion in the 70s, with the Doctor clearly affected by Joe's departure. All that's missing is the Brigadier telling him to hit the gym. Season 10 nearly began with a creative disaster. It was thought that it was time for a new version of the iconic theme tune. It sounds like a tone-deaf person wearing cricket gloves playing an 80s Casio tone keyboard underwater.
It's not real!
The results impressed no one, and the production quickly reverted to the original theme and redubbed the completed episodes. Some early edits with the updated theme did make it into the wild, and yeah, bullet dodged. Season 10 was the first time the show ever celebrated its own history. The season is, in various parts, fun, breezy and cheesy, adventurous and serious, well-made and not so well-made, sometimes within the same episode. Next season would see Jon Pertwee's last year of the show, but first we'd get a new companion, a new title sequence, and a new car. Oh, and dinosaurs. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.